Hi, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of the Enterprise Alchemy podcast. I'm your host, Meg, and today we are diving in once again to universities and higher education. The pressure is on how to modernize, attract top talent, and prove their value in an era where students and businesses alike demand more from education. Few people understand this challenge better than today's guest. He's an award-winning researcher in social psychology and urban politics, a respected university leader, and unlike most in his position, someone who isn't afraid to shake things up. From embracing social media to redefining academic programs, he's bridging the gap between tradition and transformation. Joining me today is Dan Myers, University President. How are you doing today, Dan?
Great. Good to see you.
It's good to see you. Thank you so much for joining me. I really wish my background was far more motivating than a white wall compared to yours.
Oh, I have this really nice office here, and it used to be the receiving room when the sisters were running the place, when the nuns, and so they would have their guests in here, and they had nice furniture and things. And at some point in the past, somebody decided it should be the president's office, so I am benefiting from that very much.
Yes, very much. I love it. And it ties really nicely into my first question for you because you've got the books in the background there. I had a nose on your LinkedIn before we came on, and you hadn't told me, but you published books, you've written articles all around social movements, social psychology, and urban politics. You've also won some awards for your research and university teaching. Tell me, is this the life you envisioned it to be?
Is this the Well, is this the life I envisioned for myself? Yes, ever since I was in kindergarten, I thought I want to be a college president. No, I actually, a lot of times people who become administrators in higher education, they almost fall into it by accident. You get into it because you want to teach and you want to do research. And, that's really what's driving you as a faculty member. And then somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, we need someone to chair the department for a few years, and so you kind of get drafted into your first administrative kind of responsibility. That's what happened to me. And then, if it goes well, then maybe you do another thing. And I became an associate dean after that. And so, and I always maintained my activity as a faculty member. I continued to write, do research, publish things, and teach when I could. I mean, some of these jobs are really demanding, and so you teach less, but I was still doing it. And I enjoyed that very much. And I always thought at some point I would just go back and be a full-time faculty member again. But things just continued to build and opportunities kept presenting themselves. And then one day I ended up being a college president. And so no, it's not something I really anticipated. And I do miss that other stuff too, actually. It was my reason for being involved in higher education was to do those kind of activities. So I still try, and I write a few things. I published an article this year about riots, and I taught one class this year, which was a lot to take on with the president job. It's very time consuming, but I love to keep my fingers in those kinds of activities. There's a lot of value in it for me. As a person, I like doing it. It has that kind of value. But also, it reminds me of what we're all about. And, I get to see how the faculty activities are evolving and how students are changing over time if I'm back in the classroom with them doing those kinds of things once in a while.
I must admit, at this point in my life, I'm so fascinated by authors and what makes them tick, what makes them feel like motivated enough to go out and write a book. And you've written a few. So tell me, what are some of the experiences you've had that inspired you to start writing and become an author yourself, Dan?
Well, my scholarship is mainly about the substance of it is about protests and rioting, which in my view is a form of protest. And so I was interested, though, in the kind of questions surrounding how it spreads, how it catches on, because these kinds of things come in waves. And they're clustered in time and they're clustered in space too, in geography. And so I was interested in why that happens sometime and why it doesn't at other times. Because there's problems to protest all the time. Things don't change that much. But sometimes we have these peak periods of protest and rioting activity, and other times things are relatively calm. So what is that all about? How does that happen? What kind of things are going on in society and in our sort of political rhetoric that drive that kind of activity to appear for a while, and then it kind of burns itself out. So that was a big part of my research work. And sometimes people joke with me that studying that kind of stuff would be good preparation for being a college president. And I guess they think that maybe you're going to have riots on your campus, or at least people are going to protest you. And that does happen because things that we do at the university aren't always popular. And so there's a certain sense of, I guess, truth to that. But in reality, I do think that being a sociologist, you are trained to appreciate power structures and local politics and, kind of unseen social structures that condition the way people act and think about things. And that's very helpful when you're doing any kind of administrative work, really, to appreciate those kinds of dynamics. And so although I never, really directly did research on, what happens in higher education, I mean, the things I did research do have implications in various ways for understanding the dynamics both at a university and in the broader world of higher education.
Tell me then, how has your ability to storytell and research supported your ability to lead?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. We might have to ask somebody who I've told stories to and see what they think. But I think one of the challenges of higher education, one of the biggest challenges of higher education, is that we have to change, and we're not good at that. I mean, higher education institutions, some of them have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. And a lot of the mechanisms we use and the values that we have go back to the very founding of these institutions. And so, it's hard sometimes to get to change. And social movements, protests, and how we understand them and how we talk about those kind of dynamics in our society as stories, that is talking about change. That's what protests and activism are about, is they want change. They want something to be different in the world. And how they think about presenting that to other people, to the public, we call it framing in the literature, is intensely important in terms of motivating action. And it's the same thing in higher education or any industry where change is necessary. We have to think about how we're going to frame this so it's somehow resonant with people's values that they hold, and yet at the same time is motivating them to do something different and to feel like there's a chance they're going to be successful doing that. If you can put all that together in your storytelling, in your motivational pep talks, then you're more likely to be successful in moving the organization towards something that's going to be healthy for it, what's going to be productive for it in the future.
Let's elaborate on that a little bit more then. What are some of the changes you're seeing that you think universities need to embrace?
Well, it's a time when we really do need to be changing, especially in the US. A lot of this is being driven by changing demographics. There are just fewer high school students in the United States right now. And in some areas of the country, it's a lot less than there were 10, 20 years ago. And that's really causing some challenges because there's just not as many students, and we still have the same number of universities and same number of seats available at these universities for students. And so it's hard to have enough students coming in because we're all still competing for the same pool of students, and that pool is getting smaller. And that's really making us have to think about doing some things differently. And I think the biggest challenge to us really is, it's driven by that enrollment issue, but it's how do we find new markets for our product, higher education? How do we find people to take advantage of higher education that perhaps wouldn't have in years gone by? It's not enough for just my school to do better with enrollment, because what's happening in that kind of scenario is that I'm just stealing students from other schools. But we need to generate new students if the system is going to be healthy, not just individual schools. So who are those students? Are they people who got part of their degree at some point and never finished? We can get them to come back. Are they people from international locations that don't have good access to higher education where they are? Are they people who are coming out of high school that need a different kind of higher education than what we've been offering? And there's an undersupply of the kind they need, and maybe we can start supplying some of that. Those are the kinds of really important questions that I think we're slow to grapple with in higher education, and we don't move fast enough to solving our own problems by getting to those new markets. It's tough because we're set up. I mean, and we're successful at dealing with high school students who are coming out. They're 18 years old and they're ready for their college education and they're ready for a traditional college experience. That's what we've geared ourselves toward for many, many years, and we've gotten really good at it. But because we've gotten good at it, it's hard to do other things, sometimes. And so that's, I think, the biggest challenge that we have to face right now, and that we need to work a lot harder at in our kind of innovation space.
Yes. And I think connecting that a little bit to the corporate space as a business and leadership podcast here, we talk a lot about the war of talent. And I think we get a little bit comfortable in what we've known to have worked. We talk about generations a lot. And I think what you're saying there is so key, that we need to constantly be thinking about what is coming next and how we can adapt to those changes. On the flip side of that, though, what's one tradition that should never change?
One tradition that should never change. Well, I tend to think that um, school, it's hard to say because schools do such different things. There's not one tradition across higher education, but I would say schools like mine, which are relatively small, and they're really focused on making themselves work for the individual student. Okay. And so that sense of caring about the individual is really important to having higher education work. And so that's important. If we're a different kind of school where we expect the student just to bend and mold themselves to us, that's something that possibly we might be able to do away with. But if we're good at this and we're seeing the individual student and we're understanding what their needs are and what their challenges are and what the things are that they might trip over, that's going to be a good thing. And schools like ours are exceptionally good at that. If you look at sort of retention and graduation rates across the United States, schools like us have some of the best in the country. And the reasons why are because we're small enough to be able to pay attention to that whole package of things that makes for a good student experience. And we can see how each student is fitting into that or working with it and not, and where we can make some adjustments to help them succeed before that thing they trip over becomes a gigantic problem and then they're out of higher education altogether. And so that sense that there's an individual there that's got a different background than the next person sitting next to them and has different needs is, I think, something that we should always have at the heart of how we're doing our business.
That's making me think then, because again, the corporate space, smaller organizations is a lot easier to be able to speak to our teams and communicate and prioritize our people. Larger organizations is a lot harder. People become sometimes just a number. If you were to move on then to a larger campus, what are some of the things you would prioritize to ensure that you're still as effective leader there as you are where you are now?
Well, I think part of it goes back to something we were talking about at the beginning there with having some experience in the campus life in ways where you can see how it actually operates, right? And if you get too far away, and there's a real temptation and there's a push for you to get further away as you move up in organization, any kind of organization, and in particular a big organization, your job becomes more and more specialized. Some presidents will tell you they spend 90% of their time fundraising. Um, I don't think that's healthy because you've got to make decisions about other things that impact the campus. And if all you're doing is fundraising, you're not going to really be aware of what's going on in other ways on the campus. And so you've got to find a way to have those things work into your life as well, and get some help with the fundraising part, so that's not all that you're doing. And so I think that's important, is to try to somehow figure out how to be part of campus life. You're going to be more than a fundraiser when you're a president, and so and you have a whole division of people where that is their job. That's 100% of their job. And so you've got to do some other things too to be part of campus life. That's one nice thing about being in a smaller school, is that it's kind of automatically assumed that you're going to do things besides fundraising. And so, you're expected to show up at student events, and you're expected to be at faculty meetings. And I here have my door is right on the hallway where everybody, students, staff, and faculty walk by all the time. I'm not protected by an external office with an administrative assistant that keeps people from getting to me. And it makes me part of campus more, and people will stop in and say hi to me. I mean, and sometimes that's tough because I'm trying to get something done, or I'm on a podcast and somebody's knocking at my door, but so it can interrupt you in different ways, but it's got a lot of good in it too, and it allows me a line into understanding what people are going through out there, and some of the things they're struggles, yes, but also the things that are great. Someone will stop down and say, I just got a grant for my research or something like that. Or a student will stop by and say, oh, did you see our game, our volleyball game? We beat so-and-so school, and they were supposed to, they're ranked so much higher than us. We're so excited. So there's really good things that come from that as well. But, let's face it, these jobs are demanding in lots of different ways, and there are a lot of things to do. But if you can have some breadth, which is always something I'm saying to people, if you can have some breadth in what you're doing, it helps you appreciate other people's lives. And that is very important in leading any kind of organization. You got to know what it's like to be a line worker down there somewhere. And that can really help you improve not only the functioning of your institution, but also having people feel like they're a part of it because you understand their life.
I haven't actually heard anyone talk too much about fundraising in the education sector yet. And I'm intrigued to know some of the ideas and strategies you're putting into place to help raise money.
Well, fundraising it is a big part of what we do in higher education. Many schools depend very heavily on funds that they've raised. A lot of it comes from alums who really value the experience that they had at the school, and they want to give back. Other times there's a special interest the person has because someone in their family died from a particular kind of cancer or something, and so they'll fund research or some kind of project that'll help. Autism has become such a big issue in the world, and so we have people who have given money for our autism programs here because they have someone in their family that has that's on the spectrum somewhere, and that they want us to be able to provide better service for those people, and they want us to be able to train people to be people who provide service to those with autism. And they want research to be done to try to help us understand and learn how to better cope. And so those kinds of things come about as well. But really, you can try to find people to do those special interest kind of things, and I think that's great. And there's a lot of that happens. But primarily, fundraising is about relationships. And you can't, just sort of walk up to somebody and say, "Hey, give me $1 million." You have to develop a relationship with them and help them understand the good things that you're doing at your school, and involve them in ways that aren't just sticking your hand in their pocket, so that they become part of the community, and then they want to support it. And a lot of times, people ask me about things like this with fundraising, and how do you approach this? How do you approach that? And I said, well, just think about someone asking you for money. If they do, what would you have wanted the context to be around that? You wouldn't want them just to come up to you and say, give me $1 million or $10,000 or whatever it is. You would want to have a relationship with them. You would want to know that they're doing good things and they're going to keep doing them, and that you can have some confidence that your contribution is going to matter. That's what we all want in the end, is to matter. And so if we can not only show people how they're going to matter with their contribution, but make them have some confidence that that's going to continue to have some impact, that's what's going to really drive good fundraising. And so, and that takes a relationship. And so, it takes time to make those kind of things happen.
I'm going to dive into your experience on TikTok next, which is really exciting for us to talk about. But before I do, just talking there about some of your success stories and investments made into the university that have helped support the funding. How are you sharing those powerful stories to hopefully engage others to do the same?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a whole division here, and at most universities for marketing and communication that really, tries to find these great stories and pushes them out in various ways. And so, many schools have, and we do here, we have a magazine that goes out to primarily to alumni, but also to other friends of the university that highlights some of these stories. We have newsletters that come directly out of our fundraising division that talk about a specific kind of contribution someone has made and trying to encourage other people to imitate that and so forth. Social media has become a big part, and I know you want to dive into that, so I'll use that as a segue. The ways that we can get information to people are constantly changing, and social media is a huge part of our communication mechanism at this university now, and in many universities as well. But some go much further into it than others, and we've invested very heavily in social media. We think it's really the way to get to people now, and there's different social media you have to use for different groups, because Facebook is now for old people like me, I guess, and whereas TikTok is for younger people. And then there's different groups that consume these in different ways, and so you've really got to do it all if you want to get your story out there in the best possible way. So, and some people still like to hold a magazine. I do, and so we still are producing the magazine, but we of course produce an electronic version of it too, and we do things to highlight stories that are in the magazine and then drive people to use the magazine to drive them to our website and to our social media, and then the other way around as well. So there's an interplay in all of these different kinds of modes of communicating.
Yeah, and the education sector certainly has multiple audiences that you have to target. Like you say, you've got the investors and the alumni that, might be looking to see more physical copies of things, whereas the people you're really, really trying to target, which is why I find TikTok so interesting, and your view on it, Dan, is the students. And they tend to be on these younger platforms. So tell us about how you began your journey onto TikTok as a university president.
Okay. Yeah. It's an interesting story, and kind of a sad one in a way, how it all started. But I would just say you're absolutely right that the lifeblood of a university is students. And no matter how much money you raise and how much you're engaged with alumni and donors and things, the university is not going to be a healthy operation unless you have a good, strong flow of enrollment. That is critical. It's number one. It's always the first priority for me, is thinking about our enrollment. Okay. Now, when I'm doing that, I got to think about, who am I trying to attract? Okay. And how am I going to get to them? And it's not Facebook, and it's not the alumni magazine, and it's not billboards, okay, out there on the street. It's something else, because I'm trying to get 15, 16, 17-year-olds interested and knowledgeable about Misericordia University. How am I going to do that? Okay. Well, I got to go where they are, right? And where are they? Well, it turns out they're on TikTok. Okay. And here's how it came very clear to me. And as I said, it's kind of a sad story, but I was with some friends, and one of them had a daughter who was still in high school, and one of her friends was killed in a car crash. And so it was very sad. It seemed like a wonderful kid. I didn't know her, but she seemed like a great person, and she was killed in this car accident. And so when we were together, he had to leave to go take his daughter to the funeral. And so while he was gone, while we were waiting for him to come back, we were looking at the obituary for this young woman who had died. And, it was a typical kind of obituary that you would see for a kid like that, and how tragic it was that she died so young, and all the great things that she did and how much people loved her and things. But then at the end of the obituary, it said, and this is it. This is when it happened. I read, it said, in lieu of flowers, get together with your friends and make a TikTok commemorating your relationship with this girl. And I thought, oh my God, like this is so real. This is where they are. They perceive that this is a good way to memorialize their relationship with their friend is to make a TikTok. That just tells you how real, and that's where they are. And I thought, oh my God, we have to get on TikTok if we're going to reach this audience. That's where they are. And so I came back to campus, and I said, we got it. Let's start a TikTok account. I'm going to try it. Let's see what happens. And people were quite skeptical at the beginning because, there's a few presidents on TikTok. They don't do a lot. Their universities have started to do more stuff on TikTok over the last couple of years. But at that time, what? People had no idea why a university president would go anywhere near TikTok. But it worked. And we started doing, and a lot of it's just frivolous, fun stuff. That's what a lot of TikTok is. It's jokes and little dances and, little skits basically, that are funny. They're entertaining. And so we dove into that and we put a lot into it. We did a lot of research about it. Not before we started it. We started and then we did the research along the way. We tried to figure out how to get our content to 15-year-olds and 16-year-olds. So we worked on that. And we really did a lot to try to design content that was going to work to get to these kinds of people. And it did work, okay? TikTok isn't the only thing. We've gone hard into social media in lots of different ways, but the number of inquiries we get now about Misericordia University, which you have to admit has got kind of a tough name, and people see it and they don't really know how to say it or they can't remember how to spell it, and so, but now things have changed. When our admissions counselors used to go out to college fairs at high schools, they'd kind of have to beckon people over to our table. Not anymore. They're stacked up at our table. Why? Because they've heard of us and they go look on TikTok. It's a strategy that students use to try to understand the school they might go to and what the vibe is, what the culture is. They go and look on TikTok, right? And so, but they've heard of us, and so they're coming. And the number of inquiries we get has more than doubled, way more than doubled since before we did this dive into social media. So it has really worked for us in terms of driving us forward on that enrollment flow that's so darn important. And just on my account, literally there have been millions and millions of views of my videos. One of them, there's one that's got almost 4 million, just one video. Okay, now that's my best one. So they're not all like that. Some of them only have a couple hundred, but across all of them, there's many that have a couple 100,000, and over the time that we've been doing it, it's literally, it's probably 10 million views. That's 10 million encounters with Misericordia University that wouldn't have happened without TikTok. And then we've got the university TikTok account, which gets more views than mine does. And then, the volleyball team has one and the football team. And so over time, we've built up this big ecosystem of social media, not just on TikTok, but Instagram and so on. And it's absolutely working. We know we've got 30 or 40 students here at this university right now who came because they encountered us through TikTok. That's amazing, And so if people think it's frivolous or nonsensical or whatever it is, well, I'm sorry to say you're not right about that, And we've got proof that it's something that really works now. And then there's been this sort of unexpected thing because we were going after high school kids, but it turned out to be this great thing to engage students on our own campus, right? And so they want to be in TikToks with me, and they watch my TikTok, and if I go around and ask them, "Do you follow me on TikTok?" They go, "Yeah." They know, or they'll say something to me about one of my TikToks when I'm walking around. It's given me a way to engage with them and something that they are happy to talk to me about. They don't feel so intimidated. They feel like they know me a little bit because they've seen me on TikTok doing something goofy. It's a really, really good thing in so many different ways. There's always downsides to these things, of course, but and you have to figure out how to grapple with those. But on the whole, this has really worked for us because of that fundamental principle of going to people where they are, meeting them there, and engaging them in that forum.
Few questions that are coming to mind on this. It's a really interesting topic for me, and myself with a background in social media marketing, I can totally make sense of what you're saying. I suppose my biggest question though is, and I'm super curious how you have engaged critics around this, people that were skeptic about this. How did you allow them to understand the value in this? And I think when I'm thinking about it, a particular thing that comes to mind is, how are you then balancing authority and personality? Maybe a faculty member came up to you and said, "Dan, how are you going to be taken seriously by your peers and students when you're dancing on TikTok?"
Well, you're right, and your characterization of that is pretty much spot on. It was, I would say, our board members and some of our, senior alumni, I guess you'd say, and faculty and some staff people too. Doing those things does not fit with the kind of stereotypical image of a university president. Okay. Now, I don't fit the stereotypical image of a university president in a bunch of ways. That's not the only one. That's not the first time I caught him off guard. I think the first time was when after my inauguration, there was a big party celebrating, and my rock band played. Okay. And so I'm up there with my guitar, and I've got my bandana on, and I'm wearing a black t-shirt, and we're up there playing loud rock music, and it's the same reaction. People are like, what did we hire? Who did we hire? We thought this guy has all these credentials, and now he's dancing around with a guitar, and so the TikTok was the same thing. And people were like, is this what a president should be doing? Is this, does this really make sense? And this doesn't fit my image. The guy's supposed to be walking around in a 3-piece suit and a bow tie and, with a quasi English accent or something, You could help me with that. That could be a TikTok. You could coach me.
To be fair, I listen back to myself hosting on the podcast and I sound so common sometimes. My pronunciation is terrible, so you should probably ask another English person.
So yeah, there was some of that, and it's faded a lot. But whenever I do something new, crazy like this, it does, kind of throw people off a little bit. I think they've come to kind of expect it a little bit more, but also that you ask, what do you say to them? And I tell them the story I just told you. And they kind of, that makes people go, oh, that's interesting. That's the first reaction. And then I start telling them about the number of video views that we have. Okay. And they're kind of like, wow. And, that really stopped the criticism when I stood up in front at a town hall. I stood up in front of the campus and I put up the stats. And we were beating every university in Pennsylvania. And there's, I don't know, 120 or some universities in Pennsylvania, including some gigantic schools. Penn State has 90,000 students. That was the only school that we were not beating in terms of engagement statistics on social media. And we're a little school, 2,000 students, and we're beating Temple and Pitt and, Penn, these schools that you've heard of, and people are like, wow. And then our enrollment has been growing, and so, it's really worked. And so people look at that and they go, "Oh, okay, I guess it goes." Then they think about it some more and they think it kind of makes sense. The other thing is we don't do all frivolous stuff on there. There's a lot of joking around and things, but we also try to deliver some content that has real value for people. And so last year during the admission cycle, the federal financial aid system was just a total mess in the US. And I mean, they kept delaying the rollout of this website and people couldn't apply. I mean, it was terrible. It was really damaging to the industry of higher education last year. And, but so I did a whole series during that time. I'd go on and I'd give people an update about what was going on. And I'd try to give them a little bit of coaching on how to get through the next step. And so it was, people really tapped into that. Some of those videos got a lot of views because people were very confused, especially people who are new to this. They were like, what is going on? How is my kid going to go to college? And so I started getting a lot of views from parents when I do that kind of stuff too. So not just the students, but their parents start watching. Yes, adults have infiltrated TikTok, now. And so that produced a different kind of content that in some ways balanced some of the fun stuff. And so one day you're like, this is how to file your financial aid. Click on this. Click on, got a screenshot showing people how to do something. And then the next one, we're taste testing different kinds of hot dog mustard or something. And so and I actually think that kind of mix helps people stay engaged because they don't quite know what's coming next. But you can't have all serious stuff because people aren't feeling that all the time, and you can't have all fun stuff either if you want to provide some value to folks. And so that's kind of been the general strokes of the strategy in terms of how we've managed TikTok.
It's almost like you have to trust your gut and do, and then provide the evidence afterwards. What's the saying where about permission? You ask for
So
you just
it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's the vibe of this, and the reality is that not everything works, right? We've tried lots of different things, and some of them have worked, and some of them haven't, and that's okay. But because that's how you be an entrepreneur in any kind of space, is you got to try stuff, right? If you over research everything before you stick your toe in the water, you're never going to get there. Somebody else is going to get there before you and scoop you, right? And so you got to run at a bunch of things and just realize that they're not all going to work. But you got to be paying attention to try to understand whether it's working or not, so you can get rid of the stuff that isn't working or change it in some way so it'll have a better chance, and drive ahead on the stuff that is working, right? And so and things that are working now, they might not work next year. And so you've got to be ready to pivot and try new things. That's part of the reality of doing this. And you said go with your gut, and I think that's right. But you got to go with your gut multiple times because there's such a variety of possibilities, and you got to try a bunch of stuff basically to make something work.
I reckon the skeptics, those people that are maybe a little more traditional. And when I think about this, a title of this podcast came to mind as we were talking, and that's Leaders Should Be on TikTok. And I think it will get people to think differently about leadership when you bring such a contagious personality to the forefront. I think sometimes we connect leadership and authority with having some sort of stance and fear so that people will do their job. Because if they're so relaxed with you as a person, then do they feel they can get away with things more? And I remember my mum taught me a very valuable lesson, actually, from a young age. And that was if I was going to get into any mischief, she would not ever have a go at me, would never discipline me, but she would listen. And she built this relationship between us where I actually did more for her. I opened up. I was the daughter she always wanted to raise, someone that she could be proud of, because she created a really warm-hearted relationship with me from a young age where I didn't fear her. I wasn't scared of discipline. And then I showed up more. And I think that's very similar in a sense of leadership and how we engage our employees and encourage really open and honest communication. That's what essentially builds this great work of trust. And in turn, our employees would show up more. I'd like to think.
No, I think that's right. Speaking as a social psychologist or sociologist, it goes back to really fundamentally well demonstrated relationships about discipline and punishment and rewards. And the truth of the matter is that you can get people to do things through fear and punishment, but they'll only do them as long as you're sitting over them with the stick. Right. And as soon as you're out of sight and you can't see what they're doing, or you lose your ability to punish them, they won't comply anymore. Right. And so if they can, go back to their office, you're standing over them, making them work hard, and then you go away, and then they can go back to playing solitaire or whatever on their computer. It just, that doesn't work. You have to develop the opportunity for them to have an intrinsic motivation for what it is they're doing, if you're going to have them sustain that when you're not standing over them, threatening to punish them. And that's a very important lesson for people to learn. It's hard sometimes because people just think that people will goof off if they're not standing over them. Well, that's because they've been using that method too much, right? And they haven't been investing in producing intrinsic motivation. And so that's, sometimes it's hard to get ourselves to develop that sense of things. But in the long run, that's the win. And you have an organization of people full of people who are intrinsically motivated. That thing's going to roll. They're going to find new things. They're going to be entrepreneurial. They're going to do their jobs well out of a sense of pride in themselves and the work that they're doing, and wanting to make a real contribution, as opposed to being forced to do it, which is not the best way to get the best out of people.
I remember actually being in class, being in school, and the subjects with students that behaved best wasn't really down to the subject. It was down to the teacher, and it was down to the relationship that we had with that teacher. If we felt we were going into a very positive member of staff, we almost mirrored that in class. We were far more engaged and far more better behaved, I must say. I want to move on now and tie nicely in from marketing into market research, and that is around universities needing more students. You've very much highlighted this, but what are you doing to make sure your programs actually prepare them for the real world? And what are some of the popular academic programs you have right now that are pushing students to join your university?
Well, yeah, we have put up a lot of new programs in the last 3-4 years here at Misericordia. And I think that's something you've always got to be doing. And it's part of what I was saying a few minutes ago. You don't know they're all going to work, but you got to try things. But you got to try them smart. All right. So you don't just, pick some random thing out and put up the program. You got to do market research, right? You've got to know, first of all, that there are students out there who want this field of study, right? And if there aren't any, it's going to fail. That's as simple as that. You've also got to know that there's a job for them on the other end. So you've got to look at that part of the market. Is this a credential that's going to be useful to them in some way, whether it's a job or preparing them for another degree, an advanced degree or something, but you've got to know that there's a way for them to use it. And if there's not enough of that on either end, the program's not going to work, right? And then the other thing you got to know is who else is supplying this program, right? One of my biggest gripes about higher education is this is what we often do. We look around and say, yeah, we need some more students. Let's see. Oh, look, they have a really good OT program, occupational therapy. They have a really good occupational therapy program over there. Oh, it looks like it's working real well. Oh, let's do that too. We'll put up occupational therapy. Well, then everybody starts flooding. And this is a problem actually with occupational therapy right now, is that there's been a lot of new occupational therapy programs, and there's too many seats now. So, there's not enough students to fill those seats. And so the programs are not financially viable. You've got to make sure that what you're going to do, there's students for it. But there's also not too many other people doing it nearby, right? In the market where you're going to get students, or you're going to have problems. So we have an incubator process here at our university that when someone gets an idea for a program, that it goes through this kind of market study. So we really understand where we could place it in the field out there, and we go into them with much higher confidence that they're going to work. And so far, we've done well with that. We had that same process another university I was at, and it worked well there too. And so, it really just adds a lot more information into your decision-making process about whether to actually put this program up or not. And so that's been a big part of making this work. Now, I think there are things that you want to keep going, even if they're not ones that produce a direct job on the other end, because they provide certain kinds of skills to students that might not be even in their major or something, but they're very valuable. And so the core curriculum, as we call it in the U.S., the kind of educational requirements that people have outside of their major area of study, those are essential, and they teach people critical thinking skills. They teach them how to write. They teach them how to speak in public, and a whole bunch of other really important skills that in the long run, for a lot of people, end up being even more important than their major. The major might be the thing that gets them that first job, but when they move up in the organization, they're going to have to know how to lead. They're going to have to know how to be part of a team. They're going to have to know how to read complex documents and distill out what's important in it, those kinds of things. And a lot of those come from that core curriculum piece. So even if you're attracting people in with a specific kind of major, it's really important to continue to drive them into that other part of their study too, because those are lifelong skills. They're critical skills that come from that kind of learning and are reinforced from that kind of learning that's not just in the technical aspects of the major.
You have the next generation in your hands, Dan, and I'd love to know, rounding up the podcast now, what's one lesson or experience from your own journey that you wish every student could learn before they graduate?
I guess maybe it's reflecting part of what I just said there, but I was lucky as an undergraduate because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was smart, I got good grades, blah, 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 blah. But for a while, I thought I was going to be a music major. For a while, I thought I was going to be an engineering major. For a while, I thought I was going to be a philosophy major. For a while, I thought I was going to be a computer science major. And then I ended up being a political science major. Okay. And that meandering caused me to have a really substantial breadth in my education. And I really value that. And I have seen many different ways that has been beneficial to me. And so what I would say to a lot of students is don't get overly obsessed or focused on a real narrow thing that you're trying to do, because these other kinds of learning and exposure, they enrich your life in lots of different ways, but they also give you these kind of skills I was talking about that allow you to be an effective person, not just in a technical sense doing a job, but as a community member, as a leader in your work organization or your church or your school district or whatever it is. You might go on a school board or something like that and participate in supporting something in the nonprofit space. Those broad educational experiences give you tools and give you confidence to be involved in lots of different ways as a person. As a parent, you mentioned parenting. That kind of broad learning actually helps you be a better parent. You don't know what your kid's going to get interested in doing and things, and your ability to participate with them in different kinds of things is really important to you as a person. And I think that people who have that breadth often report, and there's been lots of research on it, living happier lives and living lives where they feel more fulfilled with what they're doing and feeling like they have more choices in life as they're going through and choosing activities and jobs and everything else. And so that would be my message. That would be the thing that I would love every student to experience, is to get some real depth. Take a couple of courses that you don't know anything about, you're not even sure you'd be interested in, but just go take a class from professor who's won a lot of teaching awards. Okay. If you do that, take a couple. My son did that. He had to take a language class, and he hated taking his language in high school, and he did not want to take another language. And I said, well, don't take the language, take the professor. And so we went on the website and found the language teacher who had the most teaching awards. And the guy was teaching Farsi. Okay. I mean, I don't think my son Micah knew what Farsi was, but he took it. And the guy was an incredible teacher. And Micah still speaks Farsi. He walks around the house singing Farsi songs, because this teacher was so great and he loved it. He hated his language in high school and he loved it in college because of the teacher. And it opened up a whole new world for him of interacting with people. He'll hear people speaking Farsi. He doesn't look like someone who would speak Farsi. He's here in the airport. He hears someone speaking Farsi and he'll jump into conversation with them and say something. And they'll be like, and he develops friendships with these people because he stretched himself out and did something different and really broadened himself. And so that's a real important lesson and opportunity that we have at higher education institutions, because there's so many things that you can explore in that space that wouldn't have been available in your high school and probably will be less available to you after you leave college. So take advantage of it to get some breadth while you have this great opportunity to do that.
It's one of the best pieces of advice I think I've had in a long time. And I wish I had heard it sooner, because I was one of those people that had a plan, and that plan didn't work out because of, I was a singer, health issues. And so I almost had to restart again in my mid-20s, which was a really weird position to be in. And I think if I could go back now, I would have taken something around a business development course just to open up my knowledge around all things in this space, to allow me to understand more avenues of what I could go in, what I might find interesting, because you don't really know always what you're going to love until you try something new.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, who knows what it's like to, I don't know, do accounting or, I don't know, program a computer unless you've tried it, right? And so, it's actually fun to do that too, and I think it makes your life more enjoyable in lots of different ways. So, yeah, I definitely recommend doing some of that, right? Of course, you have to, be focused enough to do your major and do well in it. But what a wealth of opportunities are right in front of you. Take them. Go take a music class if you've never done music. Go learn basic guitar or singing or something. It'll be good for you. You'll find out something about yourself. It's good stuff.
I want to add there as well that it is never too late. Although I didn't continue my higher education at the time, I'm at a point in my life now where I'm learning each day. I'm reading, I'm writing, I am searching what are some of the online programs that I can be involved in to advance my knowledge in my late 20s. And for everyone else that's in their late 20s, 30s, and 40s, there is always room to prioritize learning. So thank you so much for reminding us of that, Dan, and for your time today. I can guarantee you have gained a new TikTok follower in me. I can't wait to check out your funny dancing videos. To everyone else that's joined this week's episode of the Enterprise Alchemy podcast, I'm your host, Meg, and we'll see you on the next one.